A year back, I met one of my ex staff, and he was going through divorce. And I asked him, "Are you considering meeting a therapist?" And he said, "Yes, I do. I'm already seeking and I'm already visiting a therapist." But he was concerned because he was discussing with me how he was not feeling so comfortable. It didn't seem like it's helping. He was doubtful, but not sure how to deal with that, how to express that. So I asked him whether he knew what was the education of the therapist and what type of therapy she was using. Not to my surprise, actually, he was not much aware of it. And I told him, okay, next time you are in the session, please ask your therapist about her education and as well what type of therapy she's trying to apply in this session that you are going. Then the next time when I met, he smiled and said, my therapist was actually a life coach. So no wonder. While psychology and mental health have gained its momentum and people are more open and ready to reach out for support, many are either ill-informed or confused on who can help, who are the qualified professional, how a person become a qualified professional to provide clinical service. Now, let's be clear here. Mental health services or mental health professional can mean a lot. It's a vast space where can include from a social worker to a therapist, a psychologist, to a sociologist, to a doctor, to a GP, a nurse. But here we are today actually to talk about few professionals who can provide, who are clinicians and are titled to provide clinical services or clinical therapies to individuals or wherever they are. So with the mental health concerns on the rise, many people, as we said, are unsure whom to approach. Services users often struggle to identify the appropriate professional who is ethical, has some ethical boundaries, is licensed, and who can be effective in the process. Students, on the other hand, who would like to become mental health professionals or clinicians are a bit confused which is the title or which is the studies that they have to follow, but at the same time, what is the path to becoming one? So titles in mental health actually have become very interchangeably, as I said earlier. But though people are trying to use soft or terms that can address stigma, like for example, mental health coach or wellness coach or certain terminologies like that, while addressing that same time, it often reduces, it often increases instead of increases the confusion. It blurs the professional boundaries. As a result, then service users are unsure who is truly qualified. What does it mean a wellness coach? What does it mean a mental health, a good listener, and so on, with the terms that we hear around. Those are actually exactly the question that we would like to address today. I have invited to be here with me in this session three very esteemed panelists, and I'll introduce to you very soon. So I'm Erinda Shah, and I'm the Managing Director of Mental Health First Aid India. I'm a psychotherapist, but yet to be licensed and practice in the country. However, most of my time goes in developing and working with mental health first aid India. Let me introduce and welcome here, Ms. Anne Xavier. Welcome, Anne. A bit of introduction for each. So Anne is an RCI registered clinical psychologist with over 17 years of experience, and she holds an M.Phil in clinical psychology from NIMHANS. She is the Chief Clinical Officer at Silver Oak Health. I would like to introduce Ms. Ghayathri Shweta Kumari. Hi, Ghayathri, welcome. Ghayathri is assistant. Thank you, Ghayathri. She's an assistant professor and head of psychology program at M.O.P Vaishnav College for Women in Chennai, with 15 years of teaching and 10 plus years rich experience in research. And I have the pleasure to introduce and thank you. Welcome, Dr. Vasundharaa Nair. She is an assistant professor and deputy director at the Center of Community Mental Health at Jindal Institute of Behavioral Science, and she is assistant dean of academic affairs at the same university. She holds an M.Phil and a PhD in psychiatric social work from NIMHANS. Thank you so much for being here, and I look so much forward to have a great conversation, to answer questions that people have and clarify some doubts. Of course, we cannot exhaust everything in this session. This will be around 1 hour conversation, but we'll try to at least give a direction to the path, or how can one become a clinician, and what are those roles, what are the responsibilities, what are the ethical boundaries, what are the licensing process for each of the profession that I mentioned above. So we'll start with you, Anne. But before I give the question to you, I just would like to add a bit more on the context. So unregulated professionals, mushrooming courses, and confusion among students and services. Who really qualifies for mental health profession in India? But as I said earlier, it's a very large umbrella. So we would like to start with what is often mentioned as clinical psychologist. And I do understand, to my knowledge, in 15 years living in India and working in mental health, that there are three major acts that helps us in this process. And I would love, and of course, your expertise is very appreciated in the aspect of breaking down these acts help which professional, that we need to sort of know that if I meet this professional, I know he's licensed by this act, and that's the service I can take from him. So there is Mental Health Care Act 2017. There is the Rehabilitation Council of India, RCI, and the National Commission for Allied and Healthcare Profession, which came in power in 2021. So coming to you with titles on clinical psychologist. Who is a clinical psychologist?
So, Erinda, to answer your question, who is a clinical psychologist defined or may be projected as from the RCI, Rehabilitation Council of India, defines or gives registrations to clinical psychologists as well as to rehabilitation psychologists right now in the country. And this is based on definitely the Mental Health Care Act 2017, where MHP, who is a CP, clinical psychologist, who is a psychiatric social work, as well as who are the other mental health professionals clearly defined there. So, as per the Mental Health Care Act, as well as the RCI guidelines, the minimum requirement right now, currently, I'm speaking about 2025 right now.
Yeah.
The requirement is that you need a minimum of M.Phil in clinical psychology or rehabilitation psychology to be registered as a rehabilitation psychologist or as a clinical psychologist from an RCI recognized institute. This is very, very important. It should be from an RCI recognized institute. If you have an M.Phil or a post graduation in clinical psychology, as per the mandates right now, you're not eligible to be labeled as or designated as a clinical psychologist.
I see.
Okay.
Okay. So you emphasize the point of the institution need to be recognized by RCI. So that's a point that I'd like to highlight for everyone who is looking to become a clinical psychologist. Because like we all agree, there are so many universities, so many colleges. There is so much of a combination of name, titles on that, but this detailed information that is required for parents and for students to understand that bit that makes a difference is not there. It's very difficult to realize that, and um, it's not given. So it's very important that students know that they need to be in institutions that are recognized by RCI. So I understood as well that there are two types. One is clinical psychologist and one is rehabilitation psychologist.
Yes.
So what is that they can do in the mental health field?
Sure. So, definitely, clinical psychologist focuses on the mental disorder or the mental illnesses part, right from the diagnostic support with diagnostics, psychometric assessments and reporting of personality disorders, any mental health issues, and everything, therapeutic intervention, as well as rehab support, especially in de addiction or neuropsychological aspects and everything. As opposed to the clinical psychologists, the rehabilitation psychologists are focused on person with disabilities. So their licensing or their area is very clearly defined as per the PWD Act, majorly,
For
not the Mental
people
Health
with
Care Act.
disability.
Yes, Persons with Disability Act,
Disability.
PWD Act, where they work very closely with people with intellectual deficits, for example, neurodivergent spectrum, learning disabilities, etc., is where majorly rehabilitation psychologists work in, and they are also trained in those areas basically. So
Okay.
this is the core realm or core training, as well as what you are expected to do as far as a clinical psychologist or a rehabilitation psychologist is concerned.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So just to put in a easy way of, so one can have a graduate studies, need to be a bachelor or a master, plus a need to have an M.Phil, and
Yes.
then it can be recognized by RCI. Is
RC.
that so?
Yes, absolutely. Right now, you need a minimum of M.Phil as a qualification from an
Mhm.
RCI recognized institute to get registration from RCI as a
Mhm.
clinical psychologist or a rehabilitation psychologist.
Okay, good. That's just to clarify that. Good. So we made the difference well between the clinical psychologist and the rehabilitation psychologist. Now, we hear people naming themselves, like I'm a counseling psychology and other things. So what are some other terms or some other ways of being confused with clinical psychologists, and how do people ask the question in understanding the difference between a real licensed clinical psychologist and another person who closely either does services like clinical psychology but is not authorized or names themselves so.
So definitely, in India right now, the regulations are very, very blurry and unclear. So
Mm,
the designations are usually assigned by, let's say, an organization.
mhm,
Organization has a role or a position for a counseling psychologist. Then
mhm,
whoever has a, let's say, post graduation in psychology is designated or given that role of a counseling psychologist, or
mhm,
sometimes a clinical psychologist, or sometimes as a life coach or a counselor and everything.
mhm,
It's
mhm,
not very clearly defined. Hopefully, the NCHP Act, as well as the whatever regulations or rules and guidelines NCHP will give us more clarity into who are the different people who can designate under counseling psychology or
mhm,
behavior therapist or specialist in dance movement therapy, all these different category and everything. NCHP might be able to give a clarity.
mhm,
As per the current standards, it's usually organization designated or self designated, right? They will
mhm,
say that I've completed a course in counseling psychology, so I'm a counseling psychologist. Or I
mhm,
have completed a course in applied psychology. I cannot call myself as an applied psychologist, so I call
mhm,
myself as a counseling psychologist or a
mhm,
behavior therapist, right? So that
mhm,
is how it's a more intuitive or more, let's say, I need to practice now, so let me give a designation which will get me my clients in place, my processes in place, is the thought process behind the clear guidelines, clarity, or rules and regulations or
mhm.
licensing is yet to be in place, is the reality of things in India right now.
Yeah, we will come to that, but I really wanted to make a difference between, yeah, there is what the clinical psychology, we mentioned it early, and the psychologist and the psychiatrist. When we do training, mental health first aid is absolutely part of our teaching in the training, that who are the professionals in the country. and what is their name, I mean their exact title, which act is associated with what type of licensing it has. And believe me, almost 90%, for not saying 100%, of people sitting in the training have no understanding on differentiating between those two. But usually people can answer to you, and with a direct question is, who are the mental health professionals that you would suggest someone if he or she needs help, either counselor or psychiatrist. So let's stand to a role between psychiatrists and clinical psychologists, the licensed one. Can we just make a difference between the two?
Yeah,
Just for the
definitely.
interest of public.
Yes, absolutely. So if you look at a psychiatrist, definitely they're coming from a MBBS background or
Yeah.
they have a medicine background and then they have specialized in psychiatry. So in India, especially, they are the licensed authority to prescribe psychiatric medication. That is
Okay.
one of the major differentiation
Yes.
factor when we are speaking about a psychiatrist and a clinical psychologist who is
Yes.
not from a pure medical or an MBBS background because they're
Mhm.
doing graduation, post graduation, or M.Phil or PsyD in clinical psychology. And maybe that is why they have a doctor in front of their name, not because they are a medical professional.
Yeah.
So the
It's a
medication
title.
prescription aspect is one of the major differentiating factor. They are a
Mhm.
psychiatrist only if they have a medicine degree MBBS plus a diploma or a MD in psychiatry. That
Psychiatry.
is the difference between a psychiatrist and a clinical psychologist.
Okay, great. So to make it simple for public, is psychiatrist is the only authority in our country to prescribe medication. But
Yes.
at the same time, if my understanding is right, is that while clinical psychologists can give a differential diagnosis, psychiatrists are the only authority who can give the definite one. Is that so?
So from a legal standpoint, Erinda, if
Yes.
we look at it,
Mhm.
usually if there is a court or a legal case
Matter.
which is going on, from a medical legal perspective, right?
Mhm.
Who is usually going to court and standing up for the victim or for the perpetrator or giving their explanation or expertise is a
Mhm.
psychiatrist in the country right now.
Okay. So the
So that
psychiatrist.
is the reason why usually the final diagnosis authority is with the
Mhm.
psychiatrist, even though differential diagnosis and diagnostic psychometry can be done by a clinical
Clinical
psychologist.
psychologist. Awesome. That's great. So it's giving clarity and is shaping this conversation as well. So let's come to the psychologist. We are not putting any title in front of them, just psychologist. So what can they do? What is their role in the mental health system?
So, in the mental health system, we cannot shrink it to only clinical aspects. If
Yes.
you look at the entire population, and
Mm-hmm.
even if you look at what is mental health or health per se, even WHO says that mental health and social emotional health is part of your overall health and well being, majorly. So, from that perspective, if a clinical psychologist looks into mental health issues or disorders, definitely the other psychologists are working with subclinical or non-clinical population as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Clinical population are when we are looking at some diagnostic classification, they have
Mm-hmm.
clinical depression, clinical anxiety. When they don't classify or get into the clinical diagnosis aspect, or
Mm-hmm.
it is a preventive models that we are working
Mm-hmm.
on.
Okay.
Definitely, that is where psychologists, counseling psychologists, all of them have a major role in, especially, let's say, from a relationship standpoint, workplace issues standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? All these are areas where counseling psychologists, applied psychology, other professionals have a major role to play in.
Totally
So
on
that
that.
could be the differentiator factor here, where there is a clinical, subclinical, and non-clinical population and it's a support right from prevention to rehabilitation services that we are
Mhm.
looking.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. A few more questions in regard to the authorities of licensing. So we understand RCI is for clinical psychologists, and we know now the Committee on the Allied Health Professionals. Can you throw some light onto what's the role of the committee? I think that there are district committees now. Every district has its own committee for registration of allied health professional, and part of them are, apart from clinical psychologists, all the rest of other mental health professional. Is that so, or what is the committee doing? What's the role, and how are the profession benefiting from this committee?
Okay. So, as per the Mental Health Care Act as well, there is a
Mm-hmm.
national committee as well as district mental health committee, and it is active in a lot of states right now. So, if there
Mm-hmm.
is a state committee, a clinical psychologist practicing in that specific state is also supposed to uh, take a license or take a registration or register themselves with the district mental health committee
Mm-hmm.
as well. So it's the
Okay.
same method or the same way that NCHP also has planned. There is going to be a national board or a national committee, and in each and every district, there are going to be
Mm-hmm.
subcommittees where they will look at the credentials of people who are applying to say that I need to practice in Karnataka or in Kerala or Tamil Nadu, whichever state you are residing in.
Mm-hmm.
And these district committees will look at your credentials and say that you're eligible to practice or your credentials are mapping into the rules and regulations of the NCHP as a whole. But in my understanding, the only the core committee has been formed right now for NCHP, and the
Mm-hmm.
subcommittees or the district committees are yet to be formed in most of the states right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a
Mm-hmm.
process in
Is in the
place.
process. Yes, this entire conversation, I'm sure everybody should listen, but with a sense of updating themselves, because as we speak right now, as of to year 2025 July, these are changes, and that's where the work has arrived so far. So, just coming to the committee, I mean, anyone can go and register. Are there guidelines as, for example, there are plenty of courses in counseling, and for my curiosity, I entered in one of them just to listen. Of course, was sad. I mean, I felt bad. I said, this is being irresponsible and unethical, because the person who has paid and was listening was taking it as for granted, and tomorrow they're going out there to practice. So where all this come? These online classes in counseling, are they part of this committee? Are they regulated under this?
Ideally, it should be regulated under NCHP in the long term, but right now,
Mhm.
NCHP has just started the process of collecting the data to build the norms or the rules. In
Okay.
2024, October, I think, there was a link shared through different platforms of psychology groups and
Mhm.
everything, where they asked individuals to go and register themselves and upload their credentials, post
Okay.
graduation, graduation certificates, and everything. That was for the purpose of looking at what are the different components, what
Diversity.
could be
Yeah.
the different relevant guidelines that need to be published. So
Mhm.
far, in my knowledge, NCHP has not come up with rules, regulations, and guidelines for the
Wow.
different professionals. And they are
Okay.
working on it. They built already the core
Mm.
committee for each profession. Let's say psychology different, ophthalmology or physiotherapy, those kind of committees have also been set up,
Mhm.
and they are working on the rules, regulation, and norming of this. So, to look at your next question, these courses which are mushrooming right
Mm.
now, make sure that whoever is attending, it will be relevant for your career or for your academic purpose only if it is UGC recognized or RCA recognized.
Yeah, okay, that's clearly UGC and RCI. I just want to say it loudly because I know I have people here in in this session who has made such question to me, and I said, you just hear it from the right professionals. What do you want to do? There are many mid-career professionals who'd like to change, who'd like to empower themselves or contribute to mental health. So that's the answer to it. So to conclude with you, and thank you so much for being patient and answering to my question. If, like I told the story, and it's a true story of my ex-colleague who said, I don't know what the education of my therapist is. So where people can go and complain, How can they be protected of any malpractice?
So that is also very tricky right now. In the sense, somebody is saying they are a clinical psychologist, and we figure out they don't have RCI registration, or they're not from a college or institution, RCI recognized one. Still, they are saying or calling themselves as clinical psychologists. Ethically, morally, it is the wrong thing to do. However, even if we write to RCI,
Mhm.
RCI is not a legal authority to take any action right now.
I see. I see.
For example, right? So NCHP is a far cry. They haven't even been formed or put guidelines or anything. So
Oh, it's
right now it is very, very difficult. Maybe we can file an FIR with the police station saying that this is malpractice.
mm,
That could be a action we can take, or you write to one of these associations, psychology associations.
mm, mm,
Maybe
mm,
they can take some action. They
mm.
can reinforce some code of conduct and ethical principles as professionals we should
Exactly.
practice.
It just reminds me when I studied social work in my country, we were the fourth generation. So we're the first few generation that we got the diploma, and the very first things that we are trying to do is bring out the code of ethic, because we felt that yes, this is the first thing that we need to be responsible towards our clients or wherever we work. So I think the code of ethic and the process of how do you retest your knowledge. Are you okay, you are registered with RCI, you are a licensed, but are you practicing? How do you prove that you are practicing, that you have practiced throughout the year, that you are retaining your knowledge? So I do understand there is a lot, there is a process going on, and there is a goodwill, what I see from every state and the central government to regulate such problems. But yeah, for the moment, I think we just need to take all your words to be well informed and to make choices, the right choices, isn't it?
Yeah,
So and contribute to see that this process goes as. Thank you so much, and I'd like to shift to Professor Gayatri. As we said, she is an academician, and she has more than 15 years teaching. So, Professor Gayatri, I'd like to bring, or I would like you to bring, rather than me bringing, but you to bring. What is the students would like to know when they choose the branch that they choose to get educated? What's the difference and the gap between the learning and the doing for young psychologists or youngsters who are getting titled as psychologists, or any what other titles are there? And of course, we do hear a lot. I mean, so many people say like, okay, I'm taking my child here, or I'm going to this therapist, and it has some big names who are not at all Indian education, are foreigners. There are some courses online done, but the name looks like big. Where do they enter in the academical level? How they are recognized?
Sure, that's a great question. So, since coming from an academic background, I would like to voice out many of our students' voices. We understand that there has been a large commercialized movies, or where so the heroine is portrayed as psychology graduate, or things like that. So, students are finding psychology really fascinating. And to
Mm-hmm.
record, there has been a great increase in the number of applications that we have been receiving for the program in psychology. However,
Mm-hmm.
having said that, students don't have adequate career choices that they can make at their final year level. Uh, as Anne was discussing, it's more of an RCI thing. They give a license, therefore, students like to get into the field of clinical psychology or rehabilitation psychology or special education. But then, as mentors to the students, we understand that that's a very small population who might need clinical or rehabilitation or special
Mm-hmm.
education. There's much to do with preventive and restorative health. Therefore, however, these courses are not recognized, so students are end up with indecisive choices, and they
Hope.
Most students progress to higher education abroad, or some students settle with these clinical courses
Mhm.
in India. And having come from a state like Tamil Nadu, who are still working out to oblige with NEP policies or not, now this is again become a very an issue during our
Mhm.
admission process to convince the parents, saying that clinical psychology is not the only area, but they can still go into the other courses. While
Mhm.
having said this, there are students who are also interested in getting into interdisciplinary sciences like humanities in IITs, like cognitive science,
Mhm.
neuroscience, and so on. But at educational level, in the 3-year program of undergraduation, we are unable to provide them with experiential or hands on skilling where
Mhm.
they can get the right skill sets to work with other cognitive scientists, such as who come from engineering background too.
Mhm.
Though
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
introductory papers, we give them a great avenues for psychology, forensic
Mhm.
psychology, neuropsychology, and so on. The choices that they can make and the placements that are offered to them is disastrous.
Okay, there's
Therefore,
much to do that. Yeah.
Therefore, most students end up going to clinical psychology or fly abroad, invest Indian money in foreign education to get a
Mhm.
degree to settle abroad. But then they again have issues coming back to India to continue that education if they have pursued a degree in UK
Mhm.
or in
Okay.
Canadian states, where an
Mm.
equivalence is not provided or they don't get right career choices to continue their higher education.
I see. Okay.
But I would say the field is really booming, and
Okay.
psychology is one course that gets the highest application, that where students have better enrollments.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for letting us know. But what we understand is that the booming of psychology and needs to mental health are faster than we are trying, or the authorities are trying to regularize the situation or the licensing or the ethical part of it. So I think, yeah, I think the work of the committees and any other bodies is much more urgent than it looks. I mean, that it seems and it looks like. Uh, are all colleges, and another following up question, are all colleges informing on the ethical part or the licensing part when students visit? Is that pathway informed clearly?
Yes. So, as a part of a curriculum development, it is essential for the program to specify the outcomes of the course, and we definitely provide them knowledge on what are ethical practices, right
Mhm.
from practice in counseling or rehabilitation sciences, or even when it comes to research pathway, how they have to be integrated with ethical practices.
Mhm.
So at college level, if they're performing any research activities, we ensure that the college has an institutional review board where it goes through the ethical guidelines and then
Mhm.
go forward. And at master's level, we ensure that students are periodically exposed to supervised training practices. Therefore, they are informed that they need to have in supervision and they have to keep
Mhm.
their working portfolios and continue with lifelong learning to get into the field of practice. So
Okay.
students are informed of the ethical
Are
practices.
informed. Yeah, that's great. That's great to hear that because one thing is for sure, taking informed decision is the rights of everybody. And I mean, young children and parents who are investing definitely are concerned and worried as where the education system is leading them as professionals. Just, I wanted to come back a bit. Just one point I wanted to clarify for students who come back to India and they've studied abroad. What is this that how do they re-enter? Is there any alignment with the reaccreditation of their studies? Is there recognition?
Students over here are generally advised to do 3 years undergraduate
Mhm.
program followed by 2 years masters, and now only clinical and rehabilitation has M.Phil. Otherwise, for getting into counseling or any other fields in psychology, they don't have to do an M.Phil. It's wide now. They can directly enter into PhD courses. It could be a
Ah,
full time or a part time courses. So students,
okay.
if they finish their undergraduate program and they want to migrate abroad for post graduation, uh,
Hmm.
there the credits are insufficient for them to enter. Therefore, they do a bridge course to enter a master's degree. Some
Mm-hmm.
countries like Canada, they request to do an honors degree, therefore they can get into the master's program. So, however, they are spending much more time in completion of a master's course. But these courses are generally 1 year course. What India
Mm-hmm.
requests is a 2 years master's program. If they come back
Mm-hmm.
here and they want to enroll for a doctoral program, again there is a deficit of 1 year education. Their credits
Yeah.
and our credits don't match. However, universities do have a system of getting equivalent certificate. It's a time
Okay.
consuming process. It has some amount that they have to pay for processing all these documents, and to their
Okay.
dismay it ends up like the equivalence is not issued. So
Okay.
students, by the time they work on all these procedural and operational delays, they end up choosing a distance education program, which is again a 2 year program offered in
Mm-hmm.
India, or sometimes they enroll into an regular courses and masters also to get into the research pathway. So
Awesome.
we find that students generally waste 1 year if they are not continuing their doctoral program abroad. However, there is a great exposure when they do a degree abroad,
Yeah.
they get that
Yeah.
licensing. But then the irony is the cases that they are exposed there, the skilling that they are given in abroad may not match the skill sets that's required in Indian settings.
In Indian
So
settings.
some students choose to continue their higher education abroad only, but while they come
Mm-hmm.
to India, it is essential that they have to enter the systems like Department of Social Welfare or
Mm-hmm.
rehabilitation homes, hospitals, uh, mental health hospitals in Indian settings to see the live patients who to whom they actually have to work. Otherwise, it's all in
Yeah.
textbooks and this mismatch of
Very theoretical.
sets. Yes.
Good. So, one a bit tricky question. So, do you see all these online courses, short-term courses, as a bit of competing with the colleges and universities? What's your take on this online and short-term certificates?
Yes, when it comes to online, the government itself has taken initiative like the SWIME and NPTEL courses, which is run by premier institutions such as IITs. They offer
Okay.
courses on psychology where this is through SWIME, massive open online courses. These are definitely credible. So, say for example, in under a UGC course, if the
Mm-hmm.
college offers 120 credit system, students can go that extra effort in doing a self-paced course, enrolling into
Mm-hmm.
this SWI portals, write an exam if they choose to, and earn the credits. This largely helps for students who want to fly abroad or within Indian setting only if they want to go migrate to North Indian states such as Jindal University. There is again a mismatch of the equivalence. Therefore, these extra credits will definitely help, and these courses are largely reliable. When it comes to international certification, I strongly recommend that students go into the proper website, check whether they are CRE courses or credit based courses. There is a proper evaluation,
Mm-hmm.
monitoring systems are only taken. But I agree, there's quite a lot of quackery. Somebody does one certification program under a premier institution such as Arambex Institute, and then they come here and run several online courses
Mm-hmm.
with high amounts of charging. I don't think that's advisable. That's more of a knowledge transfer, but that
Mm-hmm.
does not provide you a credential to practice in the field of psychology as CBT practitioner. Because while you do it in the right institution, it goes up to lakhs. But when you attend a workshop, 3 day workshop, it could be just 3,000, 6,000, or something. So
Mm-hmm.
I think students should be given that awareness while they're at college only, and to verify this before they enroll.
I think the need for proper, very honest, transparent counseling of children when they choose their direction is very, very, very crucial. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned some of the courses, online courses that are legitimate and are under in a structured way, but what comes across as what is more hampering on the in the social media are courses that are not legalized, are not recognized, but randomly using as well big logos. Unfortunately, I do tell to people, please verify, please ask, is your right, you are paying the money, it's your time. Do not just jump on courses that mimic other names or trying to sell something looking large, but actually at the end is nothing valuable to you. Thank you so much, Dr. Gayatri. Was absolutely very insightful to hear from you. And I've studied social work. I have a master's degree in social work. And I remember when I was in Albania at that time, the system is different actually. So I felt that I would become a social worker. It was very new role in my country, but I felt that way, and I'm so proud of being a social worker. Later on, I became a psychotherapist and studied for it, but I'm so proud for being a social worker, and I'm glad that I have Dr. Nair here. She's a psychiatric social worker, and to you, some question around the role. Who is a psychiatric social worker? What a psychiatric social worker does? The boundaries in the clinical perspective, because of course we said, as Anne said, and all of us have agreed that it's not only the clinical part of it, but we know that the clinical part of it might be more damaging or much less ethical on the process. All have importance of it, but of course you need to have the clinical exposure to provide those services. So wanted to understand, for the benefit of public, the profile and the position of psychiatric social worker in providing services in mental health.
Thank you, Erinda. So essentially, the profession of psychiatric social work in our country is as old as 1967, to be very, on paper, if I have to record it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we speak about who is a psychiatric social worker, I think all my previous speakers have been speaking about the Mental Health Care Act, which clearly delineates who and what and how does one become a psychiatric social worker in our country. Now, other than the clinical part and everything, how does our role become much more specialized in the gamut of mental health? It's when one starts, so a person who has essentially a master's in
Mm-hmm.
social work
Okay.
decides to pursue the M.Phil in psychiatric social work, which
Mm-hmm.
now is probably in the process of getting shifted as Masters in Advanced Social Work as a course, right? Given the
Mm-hmm.
changes in NEP, right? So it's essentially when you start working, getting trained and supervised to provide casework, group work, as well as the different interventions for psychiatric and neuropsychiatric persons, their families, and communities. Now, that is exactly when the role and the work becomes different.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I've found in my own training and my practice, and now as an academician, is
Mm-hmm.
that in the entire period, the rigorous training of 2 years helps you in understanding what clinical, what training, and what academic elements make the niche that you are pursuing as a profession, right? So
Okay.
as a PSW, you're not looking at the person as a single component. You're
Okay.
looking at just not just the immediate, but in crux, if I have to say, the larger variables which is affecting the mental health continuum of the person.
Multidisciplinary perspective.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're
Okay.
looking at essentially the person, the family, and the community context.
Okay. Okay. So, who regulate this title, the psychiatric social workers? Only the Mental Health Care Act, that's the recognition?
So essentially, the terminology of psychiatric social work finally came in the year 1985 when they were
Okay.
deliberating and finding out what title should essentially come in.
Mhm.
Though the Mental Health Care Act essentially legally puts it out there, it's again, as Professor Ann was mentioning as well, the NCHP Act, which also says that who and where the licensing of PSWs essentially come into our country.
Okay. Okay. So the licensing come from?
So far, we did not have a hardcore licensing that was
Okay.
happening. So essentially, there were institutes that have been established by the country, and a person who has gotten an M.Phil from those recognized institute was someone that was considered to be a PSW in the country. For example, institutes like NIMHANS, institutes like CIP Ranchi, RINPAS, LGBRIMH, etc., to name a few, right? But now that the act has already come, and it has already listed the PSWs under it, we are now awaiting the final licensing procedure to start for it. But they've already, I think most of us who had, sort of passed out and done, have already registered ourselves for getting the database and, providing the necessary documentation for the license.
Okay. So in all the conversation, we heard that M.Phil is a turning point. But like you mentioned, M.Phil now is in sort of way out. There is under the Education Act, the recent one, M.Phil is in a question mark. So how is this supposed to be regulated? Not only for the social worker, psychiatric social worker, but as well for the clinical psychologist. What could be the paths? Just as of course, those are not the definite one, but as professionals working and contributing to this process, what are the paths for, in this case, for psychiatric social workers to be called one once the M.Phil is not there?
So what the government had given as an opportunity is that when they said that M.Phil to be taken off, these institutes that I just mentioned to you
Yes.
essentially wrote back to the committee saying that if we have to have a person who has a particular title, say for example, of a PSW in a country, then you need to have this many hours of clinical training, supervision, and learning. And only then can this person be someone who is accredited even under the act, as that was already passed, that these members can do it. Hence, in that response, what the government then said is, okay, you make a revised course, which is now both in clinical psychology and psychiatric social work, coming out as a master's in advanced psychiatric social work and master's in advanced clinical psychology. So that will be now the passing of that degree, essentially.
That bridge in between.
Yes, that would be the one. Yeah.
I'm very interested to understand what would be the difference between the M.Phil course and the advanced course for both. What was the purpose of changing it, or what's behind it? So it'll be very interesting. But in already a situation where many things are not clear, many are in process, adding a bit more to it, definitely it doesn't help the public in the process. But of course, there will be good reasons, strong reason for improvement. I trust that those are movement that helps the improvement. And above all, my concern is highly in regard to the ethical process of delivering services. It doesn't matter, is a therapy, is a counseling, is a multidisciplinary team, or is a rehabilitation process. The ethical process, the client need to feel safe, need to feel protected in the process. And that's what is all this conversation. And I'm sure all the movement that government is doing is on the concerns to offer high quality and safe to the public at large. Now, I'm sure that everyone who works in mental health needs supervision. So where is this process for a psychiatric social worker? How does that happen? Is this legalized? Is there somewhere a process or a learning about it?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning, it's a 2-year rigorous clinical training, which is considered the bare minimum for a person to actually have a psychiatric social work degree. So when I say 2-year intensive rigorous training, it's supposed to be having an exposure to all the different cohorts. So from essentially children to geriatry to specialized section, for example, say geriatric, cohort, or child and adolescent cohort, or say addiction, or psychosocial rehabilitation, or neurology, neurosurgery, etc., to name a few, right? And then post that, academically as well, you're supposed to be bringing out cases with whom you worked, gotten supervised also by the multidisciplinary team, and
Mhm.
also your own consultants of your own field. Then, again gets presented, and then you need to sort of defend what you have done in a room full of individuals who would be from your juniors to way seniors, right? And then you have the final, external, internal examinations along with research components, which then finally sort of defines that yes, this person has completed all the necessary and hence gets the PSW category as the degree, essentially.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Nair. But I have a few questions open to three of you. Definitely, I'll highlight again. So we detailed a lot about the process, the pathway to becoming one. Okay. Now, to being one, to providing that service, I mentioned again and again the process of ethical and quality services. So, licensing is assured by RCI for some of clinical psychologists, not all of them. And I do understand that RCI licensed have to gain certain amount of points by participating in events that are clinically approved or they are RCI approved. Supervision and assuring that, let me take my example, if I am a professional in mental health, I'm offering some services, how, and I am authorized or licensed, so how do we assure that I am providing year by year ethical services? When I got the license was 5 years back or 10 years back. I keep my points. I go and meet and see and participate in conferences, but who assures my quality? Yes, Dr. Nair, you can.
Given that this is something that, very actively happening in the PSW thing, I thought I'll raise my hand and probably
Please.
answer first. So previously, I do know when I was probably doing my master's, it used to be this group called as Indian Society of just professional social workers,
Okay.
which then changed when we did our M.Phil PhD college. So we have only one organization across the country called as the Association of Professional Social Workers. All
Okay.
right, which psychiatric social workers, which is called as APSWP. So now it's like very rigid for us, where every year from the time we essentially get our degrees, that we have to say what we are doing, where we are at, and essentially come in and clock in on the regular yearly conferences and essentially present your work, which I think is a fairly rigid thing that now they are trying to put very rigorously in a country. Also, another important or interesting component that's also arising is that, say, I'm a person who's already a professional, I am supposed to be part of this continuous teaching where I am teaching, even this could be digital, this could be in person, based on my availability. But I teach the coming in group of the PSWs in making essential.
The academical experience.
Yes, those
being there.
hours teaching and then my research work that I'm supposed to do independently, all of them get accounted.
That's good for the one that are submitting. Excellent. And to you, for the clinical psychologist, what is assuring that year by year I'm clinically supervised and I am reporting that I'm doing my job. I'm practicing for what I'm licensed.
Unfortunately, even though registration is there and regulatory body, supposedly RCI is there for clinical psychologists, the requirement is continuous rehabilitation education credit, CRE credits, as it is called, and you have to acquire 100 credits over 5 years. And this is majorly workshops, conferences, online learning sessions, and supervision or how you need to have supervision hours is not mandated or regulated in any of this at all. Personally and professionally, I really believe that that should also be part of the licensing or as well as the
Yes.
license renewal process. But
Yes.
right now, there is nothing mandated from RCI as well. I hope NCHP at least makes some ground rules regarding supervision and regularly having number of supervision session as part of licensing or continuous education itself. So right now there is nothing regulated for the professionals. It is through personal interest or through
Interest, yes.
organization or institution mandated supervision that people take up.
Take up those courses. That's awesome. Great. I think I'm not sure. I'll just leave the floor open if any of you would like to add something that you feel is important for public to hear and for people to take away. If there is anything that you feel is important to know.
I would just like to add upon a couple of things because I represent much of student community. So every student has to have broader knowledge beyond their college education, and these government organizations should open up some opportunities for students to intern. Like we have several district mental health programs and so on. But if you look into their websites, it's hardly updated. Students don't have an access to know the who the hierarchy is, how to enroll, and so on. So I think this forum should help us represent from students how to take up this. Now that many schools and there are many Cambridge boards that are opening up psychology as mainstream education from 11th and 12th. So there are many students who flow into this field. It's more of a self-regulated system when it comes to non-clinical or non-rehabilitation psychologists, where we are left with no governance, no proper credentials or streamlining. Therefore, if there is opportunities are there, you definitely have placements, you have better education, you have many people who can come in to take your services, but then the governance streamlining is what stops. So for student community, enroll to a course where it is fully accredited, it is internationally standardized. I would definitely say that psychology in Indian systems have been more of indigenous practices. Therefore, most of our therapies or techniques that we teach is international. Therefore, while they are enrolling to any specializations, therapeutic skills, or so on, let them directly enroll it to the main institution. I'm sure educational loans are available to complete a CBT course or an REBT course. Therefore, the regulatory systems are in line until we look forward to this NCHAP, who can also give this licensure program and unique identifier for non-clinical persons, and dismissal of several statutory bodies that gives this licensing and so on. So students are left with lack of confidence. Though they have skills, knowledge, there is lack of confidence to pitch in into the profession. But I would definitely assure that there is so much of transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approaches that the students go in. So most psychologists get into the field of academician and research only, but there are a lot left into it. So wishing them all success to get into it. And
Excellent.
I'm sure this is a great program which will resonate several student minds.
Excellent. Thank you, Doctor. It's yeah, very important. One thing that we'd like to take away is definitely that mental health professionals, the industry has become large, and there is no longer just the clinical perspective of it. But as a country with a high level of prevalence of mental illness, with a high level of stigma, and unfortunately a high gap of treatment, there is a huge need to clarify where is the need, who is the right profession to address that clinical need. Definitely seeing mental health in the perspective of lenses of not only clinical, but as well social, economical, and emotional. So definitely the scope for students to embrace different fields is there. But that the need for regulating any professions working in mental health is absolutely urgent. I definitely cannot, nobody doubts. And thank you so much, Anne, Gayatri, Dr. Nair, for giving all your experience, thoughts, and information. I'm sure many people will find clarity on that. Again, I'd like to mention that this information is as of July 2025. There is a lot of work in progress that is going to change. So always refer to the government site, the website information that is factuated by the government that to in order to get the right information or the right authority.